So this is a very random video that I decided to make after I watched the latest documentary on JonBenet Ramsey on Netflix. So in the 90s, I remember walking to the checkout and seeing JonBenet splashed all over the tabloid magazines. And that was about as much as I knew of her until maybe my early 30s, and then I think I watched a YouTube on the case, and then I watched that documentary, so that was like the most illuminated I had been on the case. I know there are people on Reddit and like true crime, forums who have been digging into it and combing through every possible nuance and speculating. I think there was a whole deep dive on her brother maybe having done it. And then the big, hysteria was that her parents were involved or did it themselves. And in watching the documentary, particularly in watching the mother, I think her name is Patsy Ramsey. I just looked it up, but I have pretty severe chronic illness that affects my my memory and my nervous system. So if I don't, I'll put it here or something if I decide to post this. But the mother, Patsy Ramsey, it made me think about the woman Patsy Ramsey made me think about Amber Heard in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard court case trial. In that, and it just so happens that it's kind of double trouble that both of JonBenet Ramsey's parents do not exhibit a lot of emotional depth. So her father's very he just kind of runs very surfacey, but this is not to say he doesn't have feelings, or maybe in the deep dark loneliness of night, this man can completely excavate all of his deeper emotions, but then when he's on camera or he's in public or around people, he just doesn't go there. But I think it was double whammy that both of her parents, they didn't seem to exhibit much deeper emotionality. And I kind of want to talk about this from the context of a condition called anhedonia and how that might have shown up in Patsy Ramsey's situation and in Amber Heard's situation. And how we kind of, so as a society, we're particularly harder on women, and especially the mother of a child, right? So that's kind of, that definitely ramps things up and puts more pressure on the woman in the situation a lot of the time. But let's say, obviously delineating between these two situations, one is a court case about speculating if, it's kind of speculating who was the actual abuser in that situation, when it kind of seems it seems very evident that Johnny Depp has very flagrant abusive behavior, and then Amber Heard either was reacting to that, or she was maybe kind of twin flaming off of that energy and had kind of a little bit of an emotionally abusive, toxic quality, or could have just been so at her wit's end with being very intensely emotionally and physically abused that she became kind of what she was, the energy that she was around. So that's one thing. And then this other story is these, parents who lost their child to a brutal murder, right? It's a very different dynamic, but that's not kind of what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that these two people kind of experienced the same sort of bewilderment at their lack of deep emotionality. And I want to kind of throw out there that what can happen when people are on psychiatric medication. Amber Heard was definitely put on psychiatric medication. I think even in an abusive kind of event that her and Johnny had, that Johnny's doctor or whatever gave her some type of psychotropic, and very evidently Patsy Ramsey was on medication. And so what can happen when you're on medication that kind of dulls your emotions to try to bring you to the middle of your emotionality is that you're kind of at a flat line of emotionality. But when you are talking about your murdered child, or you're talking about your abusive relationship, what can happen is that you're not able to reach a full emotional breath. So you are sort of performing the emotion. And I think that this is what's happening with a lot of people, and a lot of women get highlighted in these situations as being kind of like cold-blooded or like manipulative or performative, when in actuality they are being performative, but it's not because they're murderous or necessarily abusive or lying, but because they don't have the relationship with the highs and the lows anymore because of psychotropic medication. That this can cause that. And you probably would see a fuller breadth of emotionality from Amber Heard and Patsy Ramsey, but just not readily. This is something I have experienced in my own journey with being injured by medication and experiencing kind of this like more subtle injury from psychotropics, and then very robust, glaring, catastrophic injury from psychotropics is anhedonia. And then in these moments where you're supposed to feel a lot, and it's going to look like you're kind of psychopathic if you don't, you sort of feel like, oh my God, do I need to perform this emotion because I can't fulfill it. I can't fulfill the order. Now, one thing I will say that I think is kind of happening in Amber's case, I get a real like early childhood trauma vibe from her. I get a like kind of a emotional immaturity vibe from her. And she's an actress, and a lot of times people who are like, I wanted to be an actress my whole life, so I can speak for myself, but a lot of times people who want to be performers, actors, singers, people who get a lot of attention, they're kind of lacking like sometimes lacking some, they're trying to kind of feed off the fire of other people. This is a very common reality with people who want to be performers, because there's something inside that's like hurt or needs to be examined and like worked through. And so but it's kind of exchanged for attention. Look how many comedians are like incredibly clinically depressed or lose their lives, right? So that's kind of a common thing. And just my cat is just fully like looking for a cat massage right now. But I think when I was watching Amber kind of be performative about these things that I think really did hurt her and really did affect her, it's like she almost approached it like the way a kid would kind of approach explaining their experiences of trauma. Also somebody who couldn't necessarily reach the emotion, but was like, I really went through this, so I really need to like show that I went through this. Let me fulfill that order. But she wasn't getting there. And when people feel dissonance between like what you're saying and how you're emotionally like kind of representing or like reverberating, right? Like we're such energetic beings. And when we feel dissonance between what you're saying and your energy, often what we equate that to is lying. But we need to dig deeper and look into things like anhedonia and someone's relationship with psychotropics. And we also need to look into how people will often perform things because they're like, maybe they're worried about being believed. Maybe they lack emotional maturity. There's so many reasons why someone would kind of outdistance with what they're saying their emotional depth. And I think that's overwhelmingly what we see in these two women's stories is that there is genuine hurt, sorrow, trauma, but they're not able to meet it in their retelling of it. And when we listen to people who are like body language experts or even just like mass consensus, people will say, smells fishy, smells inauthentic, must be lying. That is a really that's a huge oversimplification of a leap. It's not always lying. Sometimes it's like the bigger question is, why is this person having to perform the trauma rather than like saying it and feeling it, right? We're feeling the stories out here, but why aren't we feeling it in here? It's not always because someone's lying. This is a huge, huge thing that people, if you're going to like get into, if you're going to dig into true crime and follow court cases and side, and obviously overwhelmingly with the men in the situation are overwhelmingly sided with, we need to dig more into why a person, man or woman, would perform a story rather than feel it. And can you see, I hope in listening to this, can you see why saying that would mean someone is lying is an oversimplification? Anyway, when I watched that JonBenét Ramsey documentary, it made me think of Amber Heard so much, because I was one of the people who I thought it was so glaring that Johnny Depp was abusive toward her, and like it was conspicuous. I don't even know how people were confused by it. Maybe especially because I knew what Anhedonia feels like and what it feels like to have to like kind of perform for people to believe you, maybe as a person with chronic illness. But I think people, even with like the facts kind of punching them in the face, they were watching her sort of outreach her authentic present is really important, because I'm sure she felt tons of pain and trauma and, has bawled her eyes out, just been like grinded down to dust by this dynamic. But you can't always feel that on command. And I think people, when they see that, they think it's really fishy, but there's a lot more to that. And so I hope that this video kind of illuminates it, other explanations. I know it's not particularly articulate, or I'm not using like clinical research and evidence, but this is something I've felt. It's something I can just kind of I suss out very readily, because when you've gone through specific trauma and you have dealt with psychotropic injury, it's this layered process of getting farther and farther away from being able to feel your emotions readily. But if you're sort of emotionally immature, or you don't get a good read on people, or you kind of don't read the room, if you have that going on, you might be the type of person who would perform that emotion. Or if you're like a bereaved mother who's on, high levels of benzodiazepines, you might just be like, I'm just trying to get through this interview and like string some words together in sequential order. So really important to factor these things in, but these things are lesser known by our society. We're just very much like A to B. Like, I don't feel you're authentic, so you're bullshitting. I don't feel you're authentic, so you're lying. But that's a very oversimplified leap that people are making.